Welcome! Thank you for joining me. Grayboardgamer here with the first turn of Red Winter. Before we begin, there was a few things that I forgot to mention in the setup video. First, when I was going over victory points, I forgot to mention victory points for enemy losses that each side can attain. The base victory points, which the finished player will get for any enemy losses that they inflict, are 3 victory points for every 2-step enemy that's completely eliminated, 2 victory points for every single-step unit that's completely eliminated, 1 victory point for every 2-step enemy unit that is reduced, and 1 victory point for every anti-tank gun or engineer platoon eliminated. And the Soviet player earns double those totals, so instead of 3-2-1-1, they're going to get 6-4-2-2 for each of those categories. And also to note, when it talks about a 2-step enemy unit that is reduced, and we know that some of our units start on the reduced side, if the player, in this case the Finns, do not get those units turned back over to their full strength side through recovery, and they just stay on the reduced side and then the scenario ends, the Soviets will still gain the points for that. It's up to the Finnish player to get those units to a recovered state and full strength. I also wanted to mention that this game is on GMT's website under the P500 page, and the developer just posted in GMT's latest monthly newsletter that there's an updated version of the game with a 2-sided map, additional scenarios, and for those that already have this game, there's an upgrade kit so you don't have to buy a whole second edition again. So if you like what you see, head over to GMT's website and go to the P500 page and pre-order your copy. And finally, before we start, I have to apologize for the appearance of my hands and forearms. I don't know if it's going to show on camera, but I have a whole lot of little nicks and cuts. I volunteered this past weekend at a horse rescue, and my gloves tore, so I was slinging hay bales around with bare hands, and I learned quickly that hay is pretty stiff and sticks and stabs you a lot. So again, I apologize for my really nicked up hands that you're going to see in frame quite a bit. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get into turn number 1 of Red Winter. Turn 1 begins on December 8th at 10:30 a.m. We have a line of sight of 4. This is the morning and there is fog. The Soviets are the first player. The first part in the sequence of play when it's a player's turn is the first player reset phase, where they would flip over all of their fired mortars, infantry guns, off-map artillery, and so forth. We don't have to worry about that here because everything is already flipped to its ready side for both sides, and the Soviets don't have any off-map artillery yet. Each unit that the Soviets have, including the reinforcements that they're going to get at their supply hex, may do one of the following actions. They can move and or assault, and if we go to do an assault, I'll explain what that is. Attempt recovery, which, like these Finns here, they're going to want to try recovery early on so we can get them to their full strength side, or dig in. And you'll see me digging in with the Finns, and I'll explain what that is when I start doing it and how it works. There are some special things that they can do on the night turn, but that won't come until turn 5. Both sides have other options on the night turn, but we'll discuss them when we get there. So now I'm going to refocus the camera and get us close to the action where we're going to see the Soviets take their turn. If you did not watch the setup, the objectives that we're trying to obtain, both sides can get victory points from them. We got the first 7 hexes of the main road. We have the Kivilsami Bridge, Katasari Island, the hotel, the gravel pits, Hevasalami Bridge. There's 8 hexes in Tolvajarvi. 2 villages, I don't know if they're in frame right now. We got Ludokamoki up here, and off frame up here we got here Visvara. Those are all places that whoever has control of them at the end of this 2-day scenario will gain victory points. I'm going to place the reinforcements just off the map on the supply hex side for the Soviets, and the reinforcements that they're going to get in this first turn are the 7th, 8th, and 9th of the 3rd, 609th, the 3 infantry companies, 1 mortar unit, 1 machine gun unit, and 1 infantry gun. I've placed them right here next to the hex, and I can bring them on at any time and they can take their turn also. I have to decide what I want to do with the Soviets. They do begin with that morale bonus, which is this token right here, And let me put that on screen for you as a reminder. Any combat they do, they're going to get a shift of 1 to the left or right, depending on if they're defending or attacking. And they're going to get this bonus the whole first day, which is the first 5 turns. And they get a 2-column shift for any assaults they do. So if we can do an assault, it's not a bad idea. And they get a +1 for die roll modifier to their recovery. I have to decide what my course of action will be. I have these 3 infantry companies here, same here, and they have a machine gun unit with them. Do I want to assault the Kivilsami Bridge because it has an infantry unit, a machine gun, and Piari is there with them. Plus I would have to attack across a hex side on the bridge, which is going to really reduce my attack strength. If I attack the bridge or across the bridge, and if I post up on these frozen lakes, it's going to make me very vulnerable. I can't get into position to get a concentric attack bonus, which would be either you're on opposite sides or you're on 3 sides with a hex separating each of your units. I don't have enough movement points to get there and do a combat with that bonus in 1 turn. I do have the morale bonus. It's going to give me a 1-column shift for combat, but I have to bring a lot of units over here because if I attack from here, PR is going to give them a 1-column shift, which means it's going to cancel out my bonus. And I'm looking at combat strength, so we got a 5 and then a 3 with a machine gun, which is double on defense for a 6, so they're going to have 11. So unless I bring something greater than 11, I'm going to be at a disadvantage. I think after looking at it, it would be foolish for the Soviets to try and attack with what they have here. I'm going to move them into position, kind of stage them and get them ready, bring the reinforcements in, wait for the next turn to actually attack, because I'm going to get artillery, or off-map artillery in turn 2 as my reinforcements that I can use to help give me an advantage in combat. Plus, if I get enough units close, then I can move a lot at once to give me the number advantage that I need when I'm attacking across this bridge and off of these frozen lakes. I do have to keep in mind that this mortar can fire 6. So it can hit as far as here. So I don't want to bunch up a whole bunch of infantry in 1 hex, because they get an advantage then if there's a lot of infantry units in one hex. I think I'm going to move them, some of them, around this alternate road here to bring some of my units this way and some here. It makes them make a tough decision if they want to keep defending that bridge or they're going to want to fall back. Yeah, I think I'll go that route. So I'm going to move the 1st to the 1st 609th, and the number in the bottom right corner is their movement allowance. In this case, it's a 5. They're going to start their movement on the road. And since they started on the road, they can use the roads as long as they stay on them. And then when they stay on them, they only move a half movement point for each hex. So for this unit, they can move 1, so it would be a half and then 1, and then a half, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can move all the way to there. So let me move that one there. Now you can move the units independently. You can choose to move them as a stack. And if you do move them as a stack, which is something you'd want to do for an assault, whoever has the lowest movement allowance in that stack, that's how far everybody can move. Now I did not have the ability to do the extended movement, which is if you start your movement on a road and you are 4 or more hexes away from an enemy, and you stay 4 or more hexes away from an enemy and you stay on the roads, you get 2 more additional movement points. But as soon as I entered this hex here with the crossroads, that was only 3 away from this enemy. It negated that extended movement bonus that I could have had. You'll see me use it with the reinforcements. I should bring another infantry unit in that direction, but I'm not going to stack them on top of each other. I don't want them to be easy picking for the mortar. So we'll move the 2nd to the 1st 609th. That also has 5 movement points or movement allowance. I'm just going to move them to there, so they only used 4.5. Staging here, they're only 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes away from that mortar unit, so they might be able to rush in and take that mortar out. but it would have to be a combat. It couldn't be an assault because they're not stacked together. You have to start stacked to move stacked. You can't pick units up along the way and bring them with you. And you can't move a stack and like deposit units, leave them behind along the way either. And that's only for stack movement. You can take units off the stack at the beginning of the turn and move them independently like I'm doing now. I think I want to move some units to the other side of the bridge and not attack, because if I stay back too far, if I'm not right next to them, then they can start digging in, which will give them another big bonus. So I want to be close enough to there within my zone of control, which is the hex I'm in and the 6 hexes around the unit. So we'll move the third of the first 609th. That's 1.5. Now, when you move into an enemy zone of control, you can no longer use the road to enter an enemy zone of control, and you have to pay the cost of the terrain type to move in. And thematically, I would assume that that means you're kind of breaking off of the road and moving into the woods. That way you're not easy to see just marching down the road. And so since we can't use the road bonus to enter an enemy zone of control, we have to pay the terrain cost. So we moved 1.5. The terrain cost, and this is forest, is 2. So that was 1.5 plus 2 more, 3.5. Now that they've entered an enemy zone of control, they must stop their movement. I don't want to leave this infantry unit there by themselves, so I'm going to bring their machine gun unit with them, and they have a movement of 4, and we know that it's 1.5 and then 2, so they have enough to get there with 3.5. So we'll move them in position 2, and I did that because they have a combat or attack strength of 4, and it's in the box, so that would double to 8. I didn't want to leave the infantry there by themselves to make it easy for the Finns to just attack them, since they only had a strength of 5. So now that they have the machine gun there, the two of them together have a strength of 13, much more formidable and less likely for the Finns to attack. I'm debating whether or not I want to move the infantry here up onto these frozen lakes, because it's going to have their attack strength, make them easy out there. And I can't bring the machine gun all the way up there because they won't have enough movement points. I would need 5 just to get adjacent to the Kivilsalmi bridge where those Finnish units are, and the machine guns only have a movement of 4. I'm taking a look at my reinforcements that I have coming in. I do have the infantry gun and the mortar coming in. And if I can get them close enough, I can use them to assist me with indirect fire support if I do want to attack the bridge. Let me move them into position. If we look at the infantry gun, we see that it has a movement allowance of 2, but it's starting its movement on the road, which is supply hex, and it is staying 4 away from the enemy the entire time, so they can use the extended movement rule, which is going to give them 2 additional. So instead of just 2, they're going to get 4. And if we look on the map here, you can see that there's a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. That's just useful for when we're doing extended movement or when we're bringing units in. Since you're starting on a road, they have these numbers here to let you know how many movement points you're using up. It's a nice quick reference, and they have it from the Finnish supply hex and up there at X1 also, where those Soviet units will come in on turn 11. So we can move them 4 along the road, and that will put the infantry gun there. And we'll do the same with the mortar, who has a movement of 2, so they can go 4, because they stayed and always were 4 hexes or more away from the enemy, so they got that extra 2. If we look at our infantry gun, we can see that its indirect fire range is 10. It can easily hit any of the Finnish units up here, and our mortar has an indirect fire range of 6. So from the hex that it's at right here with this infantry gun, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it can hit the bridge too. So I could use both of them if I want to get aggressive and attack. So I may want to move some more infantry units into position. Again, I do have to worry about stacking too many in one place, because the Finns have a mortar here, and way up here they have their 2 off-map 76mm artillery pieces that they can use, but they're much weaker than the ones that we're going to get. They only have an attack strength of 2. I'm going to take some chances early on here with the Soviets. I'm going to go ahead and move the 4th of the 2nd, 609th. They can move 5, so it would be 1, 2, 2.5, and then 2 to move there because it's next to the enemy. So that would give them at 4.5, so they can make it there. So we'll grab that unit and we'll have them join here. I know I have 2 infantry units there. I definitely don't want to put any more than 2 because of their artillery and mortar. I think I can move up to here on the frozen hex. It puts them in danger, but I got to take chances because I got to kind of push them out so I can get access through this road and start getting to these objectives. And I don't want to go the route of crossing this frozen lake and land and going over here unless I absolutely have to. I may do that with some reinforcements while they're engaged here, bring some people across the road here, or the frozen lake. So this is a movement of 5. So if I go 1, 2, right onto the frozen lake, which is 1.5, so that would put me at 3.5, and then 1.5 to move here would put me at 5. So I think I can do that. So I'll move the 5th of the 2nd, 609th. That would be 1, 2, plus 1.5 is 3.5, plus 1.5 would put me at 5. Now it's dangerous putting them out there on the frozen lake, I know, but I'm going to get aggressive and take some chances. And I'm going to move the 6th of the 2nd, 609th with them. We already know we can make it there because they have the same movement allowance. And now their machine gun cannot make it there. It only has 4 movement allowance. So 1, 2, 2.5, and then it would be 2 more to move there because it's in the enemy zone of control. It would put me at 4.5, so the machine gun cannot make it to there. But I could position it here, and it has a range of 3, which means it can do an attack on that machine gun, because I know this one's going to try and shoot at us. So let's move it there. That would be 1, 2.5. And that leaves these units off map. So we have 3 infantry companies and a machine gun. And the infantry companies can move 5. With extended movement, they could move up to 7. But once they get within less than 4, which would be at this crossroad, they couldn't keep using that extended movement. So we're going to stop them right here, 4 away from the enemy. And if you hear this weird whistling noise in the background, we got some strong winds today, so you might hear that. So we'll move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they didn't even need to use the extended movement because they could move 5 anyway. How far is that mortar? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so it's out of mortar range, so it's safe for us to move the 7th, 8th, and 9th of the 3rd, 609. Actually, it's not safe because we have off-map artillery. I don't want to stack 3 of them together. So we'll move 1 a little bit short there. And our machine gun can move 4. With extended movement, it can move up to 6. So we'll place it here with these infantry units. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is all of our units. They've all moved. They weren't going to assault, attempt recovery, or dig in, so we got everybody moved in position. And now we'll go into the combat phase for player 1. Now I'm going to do a ranged attack with the Soviets. I'm going to use this machine gun here, MG2609, and I'm going to fire at this Finnish unit here. A ranged attack can be done as long as the unit has a ranged attack strength, which this machine gun does. It has a strength of 5 and a range of 3, and it has to fire into non-adjacent hexes during the combat phase. So we're in the combat phase, and we want to fire at this machine gun, and our main goal here is to suppress it. That'll keep it from firing and helping out with defensive support during our attack. This attack from here to here is a direct fire ranged attack, which means it originates from a unit that has line of sight on the target hex. And right now we have a line of sight of 4, and we're only 3 away, so we're okay there. And As long as the hexes between the two units are all frozen lakes, we need that to have line of sight also. And in this case, everything meets up. So we can do a direct fire attack. Also as a note, if this unit was in an enemy zone of control, I couldn't do this direct fire ranged attack. We don't have that. There's no enemy units in any of the adjacent hexes, so we're okay there also. And ranged attacks are handled quite easily. We're going to roll 2 6-sided dice, but first let's figure out what our ranged attack modifiers are for this instance. If we look at the ranged attack modifier table, we look and see it says the target hex contains 1 or more infantry companies. In this case it does not. It's a machine gun unit, so we don't get that bonus. The target hex is a frozen lake. No, they're in a fort. The firing mortar or infantry gun is self-spotting. In this case it's neither one. We're using a machine gun, so that does not apply. This is not indirect fire, so we don't have to worry about number 4. Number 5, this target is not dug in. We do have a problem though, because here at 10:30 in the morning we have fog. So we're going to subtract 1 from our result. This is not night. We are a machine gun and we're firing at a range of 3. So we're going to lose another modifier. So we're at a -2. So most likely we're not going to hit, but I'm still going to give it a shot. If I get a really good roll, I will be successful. So we have a die roll modifier of -2. If we look at the MG2 609, we can see that we have a ranged attack strength of 5. So we're going to add that 5 onto our roll, but we still have to subtract that 2. So we need to roll high, because anything 13 or less is not going to yield any kind of result for us. And that's not going to do it. That's only going to give us 5 plus 5 for our ranged attack strength takes us to 10, minus 2 is 8. And if we look on the ranged attack table, we can see that we needed at least a 14 to suppress or higher to do some damage also. So that was unsuccessful. I would have needed an 11 or 12 to be successful, but it would have allowed me to suppress that gun and take it out of the action here for support. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this unit to the left 90 degrees. And that's just for me to remember that I've already taken an action with that one. I don't want to make the mistake of getting confused and doing more than one action with a unit. Now there are cases where they can do more than one. If I was in a position to support, defensive support, then it would be a different story, but I don't have that instance right now. I have to decide if I want to go ahead and use my mortar and infantry gun to throw some indirect fire onto this bridge and hopefully give us column shifts to our advantage. Or if we really roll good, maybe we'll actually do some damage and cause some step reductions to the units there. Because when we attack, we're attacking across the bridge and from a frozen lake, which means our attack for everyone is going to be halved. So we have 2 units with 5 there. We have 2 5s and a machine gun with 4. So we're looking at 24 total attack strength or combat strength. So that's going to go down to 12. Now that is okay because they're going to be at an 11. So we're still slightly higher than them, which will keep us in the good range as far as columns go. And that'll make more sense when I show you what the column shifts mean and how they apply. So I'm going to stay aggressive and I'm going to use my mortar and infantry gun down here as indirect fire support for this coming combat that we're going to do. They have units right next to them and you can always see or have line of sight in adjacent hexes, so they have spotters, so we don't have a problem there. We have to resolve these individually. So we'll start with the weaker one. We'll start with the infantry gun. And it has a ranged attack strength of 3, and it's in the yellow box, which means that it's indirect fire. So we know we only have a ranged attack strength of 3, and we're lobbing rounds into that hex. You can't target a particular unit, we're targeting the hex. So if anything that happens as far as step losses, then the defender will decide how they take those. Let's take a look at our ranged attack modifiers and see if we're going to be successful here. We want to get some column shifts. So does the target hex contain one or more infantry companies? Well, let's take a look. We have our leader there. He doesn't apply. We have one infantry company there. The machine gun is not an infantry company, which means we get +1 per infantry company, so we get +1 to our roll. It's not a frozen lake. The infantry gun is not self-spotting, it's using a spotter. Our spotter is next to them, so we don't lose one there. They're not dug in. We do have fog, so that's going to take one off, so that +1 and -1 are out, and then night turn and armored unit and machine gun do not apply. So we have no die roll modifiers there. We still need to roll high because this only has a ranged attack strength of 3. And again, we need to get at least a 14. So we need to roll at least an 11 or 12, which is possible. Oh, no. 8, 9, 10, 11. Not good enough. Let's move on to our mortar. So we will take our infantry gun, flip it to the infantry gun fired side so we know we used it already. And now we'll go ahead and do the mortar attack. We're in the same hex and we're under the same conditions, so we know the mortar's modifier is going to be 0 also. But it's stronger, so it's going to get a ranged attack strength of 5, so we don't need to roll as high, but we still need something that gives us a 14 or higher. 5, 6, 7, and 5 is 12. A little bit closer, but not enough. Our mortar has fired, so we'll flip it to the fired side, and that will reset at the beginning of the player's phase, so he will not be able to use those on the Finn's turn as defensive support. It's because they won't flip back over until the Soviets get a turn again. So that's something you also have to consider if you want to save your indirect fire weapons for defensive support. But I'm going to go ahead and play the Soviets aggressively right now, trying to make some ground, so we're not going to play it that way. The Soviets are now going to conduct combat. The first thing they need to do is declare which hex that the Soviets will be attacking and which units are attacking it. We're attacking this hex right here on the other side of the bridge, and we're going to use all the units here and all the units in that hex there to attack. Now I would declare any offensive support. For example, if I was going to fire the mortars with this combat attack, I've already done it, and I don't have any other artillery or indirect fire that I can use right now, and I don't have any direct fire support that I can use right now either. Now the non-phasing player, which is the player who it's not their turn, would now declare any defensive support that they want to use for this combat. And I do have those 2 artillery pieces, the 276mm guns, off map. The Finns only have 3 ammo. And we're not going to get any more ammo supplies until turn 6 at the beginning of the second day. So do I want to use up ammo right now? Well, let's see what we're up against. We know that the Soviet morale bonus is going to give them a column shift, but Piari's here, who also gives us a column shift, so those will cancel each other out. The Soviets are going to attack with a strength of 10, 20, 24. But that's cut in half because they're attacking over a bridge and from a frozen lake. So they're attacking with a strength of 12. And here in this hex, I have a 5 and a 3, which gets doubled because it's in that black box. The machine gun's for an 11. So it will be a 12 attacking 11. So I want to take that into consideration if I want to use artillery or my mortar. I could also use this machine gun here as direct fire defensive support because they have line of sight and range. I think I'll use this machine gun as defensive support to this hex here because in order to use defensive support it has to be against a hex that is actually taking part in the combat. So I can't attack this one back here because this machine gun is not taking part in the combat. And I'm also going to use my mortar here as defensive support also. Soviets don't have any offensive support, but I have 2 units that are going to help with defensive support. And I have to declare which they're going to attack. This machine gun, of course, is going to attack there. I have 2 infantry companies out here on the frozen lake. And they are taking part in the combat. So I'll have this mortar lob some rounds into that hex. We will start with the machine gun. We have to resolve this before we actually conduct the combat. So the machine gun is firing on this hex right there. We have our finished machine gun unit, MG1 JR16, attacking that hex. So we need to conduct a ranged attack using the ranged attack table. Look at our modifiers again. There are 1 or more infantry companies in that hex. There are 2 infantry companies there, so we'll get a die roll modifier of 2. This is not a frozen lake. This is not a mortar or infantry gun. We have no spotter. They're not dug in. This is still morning, so we still have our fog to deal with. So we're going to be -1, so we have a +1 modifier. It's not night, no armored unit or anything like that. So we have a die roll modifier of 1. Our machine gun has a ranged attack strength of 4. +1 plus what we roll here. Ooh, that's a good roll. 11 plus 1 gives us 12, plus a ranged attack strength of 4 gives us a 16. If we look on the range attack table, a 16 gives us a suppression. That's definitely going to help the Finns out. So we'll place one of our suppression markers on top of that stack so we know that we have a favorable shift in favor of the Finns. And now we'll lob those mortar rounds on this stack of, I believe, 2 infantry units on the frozen lake. When we look at our mortar JR16 here, we have a ranged attack strength of 4, but let's look at our modifiers. There are 2 infantry companies there, so that's a +2. The target hex is a frozen lake, so that's +2 because it's versus the Soviets. So we're up to +4 on our modifiers. We're not self-spotting. Our spotter is adjacent. They're not dug in. We do have the problem with the morning fog, so it's going to bump our modifier down to 3, and nothing else applies. So we still need a good roll here. A 9 plus 3 gives us 12, plus the strength of 4 gives us a 16 also, and we know that equals a suppression. That is another favorable column shift for the Finns. This is looking to be a very foolish action for the Soviets. Let me flip my mortar over since it was fired. Looks like my idea to attack was unwise, but we need to finish carrying out the combat. The Soviet morale bonus and PRE cancel each other out, and then we will have these 2 suppressions, which is going to give the Finns a defensive shift of 2 columns to the left. But let's conduct our attack first. We know we have 24 total, and that is taken down to 12 because of the penalties attacking across a bridge in Frozen Lake. And we know our stack here has the machine gun. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 5 is 11. So that is a 12 to 11 ratio. Now we have to simplify that for the combat results table. It is rounded in favor of the defenders. A 12 to 11 ratio is basically a 1.1 to 1. And since it's not a whole number, we're going to round that down again in favor of the defenders. And it's just going to be a flat 1 to 1 ratio. So we look on the combat results table and we can see there are several ratios here. We have the 1 to 1 ratio, but we had those 2 suppressions that land Soviets, which is going to make a 2 column to the left shift occur. So we're going from a 1 to 1 to a 1 to 2 to a 1 to 3, which puts the Soviets at a terrible deficit. If we look on there, you see there's red numbers first and then black numbers there. The first number is the losses that the attacker takes, and the second number is the losses that the defender takes. So unless the Soviets roll really high and get really lucky, they're going to take really bad losses here. There are other modifiers to consider. So right now we're at a 1-to-3 ratio. Then we look at the Combat Assault Finnish Night Raid Resolution Modifiers table. I know it's a mouthful, but it just applies to a lot of situations. We already took into account the Frozen Lake Bridge penalty. This is not armor. We took into the suppression from the range support. There is no concentric attack bonus. Again, that would be if the attacker is on opposite sides or on 3 sides evenly distributed. Basically, it would have a hex in between them. The defender's not in a frozen lake. We already took into account the PRE leader bonus. The defenders are not dug in. We took into account the morale bonus for the Soviets. There is no armor bonus. We have not changed operational stance, no bonfire, and the Soviets have not had a morale collapse. So that's going to keep us at a 1-to-3 ratio. So the Soviets need to roll 2 6-sided dice and hope for a large result. The only thing that saves the Soviets here from taking losses would be an 11. But if they get a 9 or higher, at least they'll only take 1 loss. Oh no, that's bad. That's a 4. So let's take a look at our combat results table in the 1-to-3 ratio. A 4 is a 3-to-0. And then we look, and the red numerals are a reminder that in combat, the first attacker loss must be taken as a step reduction. This foolish assault at the bridge really cost the Soviets. So let me move these suppression markers out of the way. If the defender had taken any losses, they would have to allocate their losses first, and then the attacker would. The attacker must always take their first loss as a step reduction, which means we're going to have to flip one of these units to their reduced side. I don't want to do that to the machine gun, because the machine gun, if they get taken out completely, they don't get a chance to be reconstituted. They're just permanently eliminated. So we don't want to reduce their strength. So I have to decide which infantry company I want to reduce, one in this stack or one in that stack. I think I want to hold my position on the other side of the bridge. So I will reduce one of these infantry companies and we'll flip it over. And we can see on the back side of it that everything stays the same except their attack strength is reduced. Instead of being a 5, it is now a 3. So they have been reduced and taken a step reduction, but I still have 2 losses that I have to take. Now I have a choice. I can take those losses in step reductions, which I do not want to do, or I can take them as retreats. In order to retreat, all units involved on the affected side, this being the Soviets, have to retreat. Retreating doesn't require to use up movement points. They're expressed in hexes rather than movement points. So with 2 losses remaining to take care of, I could choose to retreat 2 hexes. When retreating, the maximum number of hexes that they can retreat is their movement allowance -2. Next, when a unit or units retreat, there are some priorities that they have to follow. The hex that they go to will not result in overstacking, so we couldn't have more than 5 units in the same hex. They can't go off the edge of the map. You can't retreat into an enemy zone of control. And then you have to go to a hex that's further away from all enemy units that contributed to their combat strength in the combat. And then the hex that they retreat to is no closer to any enemy unit that contributed their combat strength to the combat. Which would mean we have to get further away from this hex here. And I don't want to reduce any more units. And everyone here is infantry except this machine gun that has a movement allowance of 4. So it has a retreat maximum of 2, which is okay. We only need to retreat 2. So we'll move all of these units. I'm going to move them back 1 and then back 2. And again, that gets them further away. And all of them will follow. And at no time were they overstacked. They did have to move through the hex there, but that's okay because it would have been only 4 units or 4 stacked in that spot. Now this one has to retreat also. And again, I don't have to worry about terrain. when retreating, as long as it's not prohibited terrain and there's no armor or anything in there, so that's okay. And that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I don't want to pull back to right there because then I would have a bunch of infantry units there, which would be vulnerable to artillery attacks. Also, the units don't have to retreat to the same hex like I did there. We can spread them out. So I'll have them retreat 1 and then 2, and we'll do the same. I'm going to keep this reduced one on top to remind me that I have a reduced unit there. And that fulfills all my losses. I took 1 step reduction because the attacker has to take the first one as a step reduction, and then I retreated 2 to fulfill the other 2 losses. I don't have any other combats that I'm going to perform with the Soviets, so that's going to end their turn and make it the Finnish player's turn. Before the Finnish player starts their turn, let's take a look at the reinforcements that they'll be receiving. They can enter via the supply hex. We have 3 infantry companies, the 7th, 8th, and 9th of the 3rd JR-16, and 2 machine gun units, the 3rd of the JR-16, that are going to come in. And I'll stage those units by the supply hex to remind me that they're coming. So the Finns begin in the reset phase, and they will flip all of their fired mortars, infantry guns, and off-map artillery. So we can flip our mortar back over. And we could also spend any replacement points we had at that time here in the reset phase. We don't have any replacement points on either side, and we won't get any until turn 7, which comes up in day 2. So now we have to come up with a plan. We handed the Soviets a pretty bad defeat when they tried to assault the bridge foolishly. We have a lot of reduced units over here. We should probably try and recover. We should get our defenses here at the bridge started. Because we pushed them back off of the bridge, there are no enemy units adjacent to us, so it might be a good time to start digging in with one of those units. But knowing the Soviets, they're probably going to advance at least to set up on the other side of the bridge, which will keep me from completing my digging in because they'll be adjacent. But who knows, maybe we can push them back again. As long as we get it started, it can stay there. And if we get another chance to complete it, or our engineer may show up later and help the situation out. I've zoomed in to the Kivalsami bridge so we can see the Finnish units a little bit closer because I am going to dig in. Digging in is a 2-turn process unless it's nighttime or we have an engineer. Requirements for digging in: an infantry, engineer, or machine gun unit may dig in during its action phase instead of performing another action. A unit may not dig in if it's in an enemy zone of control. That's why it's good that we push them back. And you can dig in any terrain except frozen lake. And if we move them, we can see that the majority of that hex, that's a little debatable. I think the majority of it is forest though, because the majority of the other side of the bridge is forest, so we'll say that that is correct. So that's not a frozen lake, so we can dig in there. As long as we get started digging in, even if the enemy moves close, that's okay, because we can finish it on another turn that they're not adjacent, or we can finish it up at night. So I will move Piari out of the way. He can't dig in. So I'm going to have that infantry unit, 1-1 JR-16, and then I'll take the digging in marker, place it at the top of them, so we know that they have begun the digging in process. We already have an infantry unit here digging in. We also have this machine gun unit here. And I could conduct a ranged attack. They are only 3 away, and it's nothing but frozen lake between us. Could I possibly roll high enough? I have a ranged attack strength of 4. And the die roll modifiers, let me take a look real quick. No, there's nothing that I can do. The best I could probably roll would be a 16, and that wouldn't put me into a step reduction area. That would just be a suppression. And they're not going to do a ranged attack from there. Those infantry units only have a range of 2. And I see that I made a mistake. I had my machine gun do defensive support, and I forgot on the ranged attack modifiers table number 8, the machine gun or armored unit firing at a range of 3 or more hexes, and that was 3. So I should have had a die roll modifier of -1. Now I believe without reviewing that I had rolled and added everything up and got a 16. So taking 1 off and taking it down to a 15 would have put me in the same result of a suppression. Even all the way down to 14 would have put me into a suppression still. So we're okay there. So even though I forgot to apply that modifier, it didn't affect the outcome. I do have to worry about these two that are coming around the backside here. I'm worried about leaving my mortar exposed here. I might want to pull it back one just to make it, because they're going to have to follow the road if they want to move quickly. But if I move back one here, it takes all of these out of range here. I think what I'll do instead is simply take this infantry unit here and move it to that part of the road. And with a movement of 6 available, that only took up 1. And I want them to stay there because that is a SUO, which makes it very difficult for the Soviets to assault unless they are in the hex right next to me. Because in order to assault, you have to pay the terrain cost of the hex you're assaulting into +2, and a SUO is 3, so they would need 5 movement points just to do the assault, which means they would have to start their turn right next to me. And that'll also keep them from hitting this armor unit easily. I mean, they could just skip across from this road hex to this one here, but they're not connected via a road. So they would have to pay the terrain cost to come over here again, which is a SUO, and would cost them 3. So it would not be an easy move. Plus they'd have to stop their movement when they enter this infantry unit's zone of control anyway. So I'm going to have this other infantry unit who is not on a road, so he's going to have to pay the cost to move onto this hex because he's not moving from a road. So that's going to cost him 3 because that's a SUO, and then another half move to move there. And that'll set up a decent defense to keep the Soviets from coming around that road there. I'm going to leave Piari here and that machine gun unit there also to defend that bridge. That way the Soviets have to really get a lot of strength to come at me from there. Although they may try it again in the next turn with the support of those big artillery guns that they're going to get, because they have a lot of ammo too. They got 10, so they can fire some rounds at me. My next concern would be over here in the village of Tolvajarvi, and I have my reinforcements coming. We have these units down here, and we have several reduced units, and then the bicycle units are all reduced also. So I definitely want to try and recover them. If we look at the recovery table, we have to roll a 6 in order to recover. If we're 4 or more hexes from all enemy units, we get a +1, so we'd have to roll a 5 or a 6. But I think I could risk it and wait until night and hope that the Soviets can't get all the way over here in 5 turns. And then at night I would get another bonus. I should probably move them into position to start defending some of these areas here, because the Soviets are going to be coming for the hotel gravel pits. They have a salami bridge. I don't think they can get over here to Ludokamoki really fast. I do have that village up in the northeast here, Visvara, that I have to worry about in the future too before the Soviets come from that very northeastern part of the map. I might be able to move these units that are coming over into these locations because they would never be within 4 of any Soviet unit, even if they got all the way to here. So let's do that first before we deal with the reduced units here. So we have our 3 infantry companies. They have a movement of 6. We can do extended movement because they're starting on a road. They're more than 4 hexes away from an enemy unit, or 4 or more hexes away from an enemy unit, and they're going to stay 4 or more hexes away from the enemy unit. So these 6s turn into 8s. And if we look on the map, we have the numbers here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 takes us all the way to the gravel pits anyway. So even with the extended movement, we're okay. 6, 7. Basically, I could go all the way to my mortar unit, and that may be a good idea. Get another infantry company over there. So I'm going to do that with one of them. So we'll take the one on top there, the 9 of the 3rd JR-16, and we're going to, let me reach over the camera. So we're going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And again, 1, 2, 3, and we're always 4 or more away from the closest enemy unit. So now there is an infantry unit there helping protect my mortar. And we're going to move one of these infantry units, 8th of the 3rd JR-16, along the road 6.5 to have one at the hotel. And then we'll move one remaining 7th of the 3rd JR-16, 6 onto the gravel pits. Our 2 machine gun units can only move 4 plus 2 for a total of 6, so they can make it all the way to the gravel pits also. So I'm going to have one of them move all the way at 6 to the gravel pits, and the other one I'm going to set up a defensive position, just 5 movement points on the opposite side of the Hevasalami Bridge. That way, if the Soviets manage to break through all this, they'll still have to attack across a bridge hex side there. I still have my 2 stacks down here that I need to deal with. I'm not going to recover right away because they can't get over there that quick. And I don't want to leave them stacked up like this because they are all infantry units except for one machine gun unit down there. And that would make them easy targets for artillery. So let's spread these guys out. We're going to move one of these units, the first of the PPP-7, just 2 spaces here because I want to also protect these village hexes. And I'll move the second of the PP-7 right there. And that'll also keep them from easily coming across the frozen lake. And the third of the PP-7 here, instead of trying to recover right now, and they're not moving, I'm going to have them dig in. And we have the infantry units here. We'll also have them move a half and 1, and then 1.5. And also a half and 1. Again, keeping those village hexes occupied. And if the Soviets don't get over there quick, we can start digging in to create a defense right along this frozen lake. Oops, sorry, I bumped the camera there. And what do we want to do with our machine gun? We can use extended movement with this machine gun. Again, he's 4 away. We just have to stay on road, so it can move a total of 6. So if I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I could come all the way to here. I'm going to go to the hotel. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because that's the first point as far as high-value targets that the Soviets would attack if they came towards us from the road. So the hotel and the gravel pits each have a machine gun and an infantry unit protecting them. And we have what is going to be hopefully a machine gun nest. We'll set up on the other side of the Hevasalami Bridge here. All these units are in position. We just need to get some digging in going. I do have 2 artillery pieces. I don't know if I want to fire them. Again, I only have 3 ammo, and I'm only going to get more ammo on turn 6. So I only get 3 shots with those things until turn 6. I'll have the Finns save their off-map artillery to use as defensive support for a, I'm sure, oncoming attack soon. I still have this machine gun unit here. I think I want to leave it in place. And not only do I want to leave it in place, but I'm also going to have it dig in. At least it'll have a better advantage if somebody starts coming that direction, because this is all in his zone of control. I mean, they could circumvent it by going under the island, but that's a lot of movement across the frozen lake, which they can do because my artillery is not very strong and I don't have a lot of rounds to fire at them. And the reason I want to dig in is if we look at the opposite side of the digging in marker, once we are dug in, we have a one column to the left shift for defensive purposes. And you could see on the combat results table earlier that having those shifts to the left for defense are very, very important. I'm not having the Finns run any combat. I'm not adjacent to any Soviet enemies. I'm not using my artillery or mortar right now. I want to keep them ready for defensive purposes. That is all for the Finns this turn. Just getting into position and getting ready for the oncoming attack, because I know in the next 2 turns the Soviets are going to get a ton of reinforcements. Things are about to get really bad for the Finns, and the Soviets are gearing up for some more combat this day, which is the first 5 turns, and maybe I should get into position for some assaults too, because while they have this morale bonus, they get a 2-column shift in their favor for an assault. But assaults can be really dangerous, because any losses that the assaulting force takes has to be step reductions. They cannot retreat to cover the losses that they take. So you have to make sure you have really good odds in your favor. And that 2-column shift helps a lot. But the only things close to them that they can really assault right now is across this bridge or from frozen lakes, unless we start moving around the perimeter of this lake in order to get in behind them. But they're starting to build up their forces in the back here too. I know this first turn went really, really slow, and you heard me talking a lot. I like talking about the strategy out loud. Again, this is my first war game, so I'm probably going to make a lot of tactical blunders, like that aggressive assault that I did on the Kivilsami Bridge. That was probably a bad idea, but that's okay. It demonstrated what attacking improperly and with not good odds does to you. The Finns did do really well in gaining those 2 suppressions and causing those columns to shift over. Because if we look on the combat results table, it was a 1-3 and they rolled a 5. Or was it a 4? Either way, if they didn't get those suppressions, we can see on the 1-1 table that those would have been 2 losses instead. So if it was only 2 losses, they would have had to take that step reduction still, but they would have only had to retreat 1. They wouldn't have had to fall back 2 hexes like they did. So having the table in your favor helps a great deal. But with that poor roll, I mean, they rolled that low, they were going to take losses in almost every instance unless they were on like a 5-1 or 6-1 ratio. And a note about the suppressions, you can only have a total of 3 in either direction. So if the Finns were to say have 3 suppressions there and then they do something and they would have gained a 4th, they can't have more than 3. I hope you enjoyed this first turn. I hope it wasn't too painful. Listen to me talk out loud and talk myself through this. I will try to speed things up a little bit in the coming turns. I still will talk about what I'm thinking, but I'll try to do it in a little bit quicker fashion and not pontificate out loud for long periods of time. Thank you for watching this first turn of Red Winter, and I hope to see you in the coming turns and in the next videos.